Okay, folks, welcome back to Swift on Sundays. My name is Paul Hudson, and hopefully by now you're getting the routine of these things. We're going to try and build an app today from scratch. The usual nature of these things, of course, is we whiz through it fairly quickly and then talk about ways to refactor it. This is our first time we're doing this on a different time zone. Normally you do it at 6 p.m. GMT, and this time it's 10 a.m. GMT. Hopefully it'll work out well. Um, I think more or less I'm ready to start. You all look sort of ready. Yes, lots of folks in the chat. Fantastic, good to see. That's what I like to see. If you have questions in the chat, by all means ask me. I do try and answer them as I go. So yeah, go ahead and ask freely. I'll do my best to get on with it. Otherwise, I'll just crack on with the material and we'll see how we get on. If you do prefer these early starts, let me know. I will see what I can do. A question already from Giuliano. Am I drinking coffee? I am actually drinking coffee this time. Yes, I am. This is literally Swift over coffee. You're getting the real live thing. So that's great. You're getting actual real Swift over coffee, which by the way is a great podcast. You go and subscribe to my podcast. Anyway, um, just briefly, I want to remind folks of the rules, which is that if you happen to harass, abuse, whatever, anybody in the chat, I will totally boot you without warning and ban you from future live streams. I have zero tolerance for that kind of thing. So please don't be like that. This time, we're going to make something a little bit different. I want to try and mix it up a little bit, keep you on your toes a little bit. We're going to make an app to inspire people. So it's going to show motivational quotes on the screen with sort of a pretty background, and to make it more interesting, we'll let them share that quote to the world, and also we'll use notifications to remind them of some inspirational morning quote first thing in the morning, just to get their day going in the right direction. So again, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask me in the chat. Otherwise, I'll just crack on and we'll get started. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and launch Xcode, and then make a new single view app. You will know by now that I make lots of single view apps in Xcode. So I'm going to switch to, where's me in the screen? There we go. You'll know I make lots of single view apps. That's just the way I work. I prefer starting from scratch. It's nice and clean, which is great. So I'll choose a single view app. And the app we're going to make is called Inner Peace. Because you're going to find this thing just totally calming you down. It's going to be great. I'll press create on my desktop. Thoughts on Marzipan? Looks great to me. You can't use it yet, unless you want to hack around in your Mac OS. Right, so I have made already some assets for you to drop into here. I have them on my desktop already. I'll give them the URL in a second. Containing a handful of pictures from Unsplash, which are free to use in your own work, commercially or otherwise, plus some inspirational quotes to get us started in our application. Now, this is the first app we've designed so far where I'm going to go ahead and deselect Universal and make this thing iPad landscape only. Because these quotes, the big pictures, look really nice on iPad screens, and I'm sure they probably could look nice on iPhone screens too. We only have 1 hour, so in the limited time we have, we're going to use iPad landscapes. It looks nice and big and chunky on the screen. Looks really pretty sort of by default, which is what you want really. Now, the way we're going to do this is, in our main storyboard, we're going to go ahead and draw out 2 image views. So I'll choose image view. Question, should I learn Unity? Yes, you should. Unity is great. I like Unity. I'm going to draw an image view for the background picture. There's been one big old image view like this. And then I'm going to pin this thing to all the edges. So I'll press Control drag and then hold down Shift and choose leading, top, trailing, and bottom. So it pins to all the edges of the super view. Now, by default, as you'll know, this thing is going to pin to our safe area, which is not ideal. This thing's a background picture. We want this thing to go under the notch, under the rounded corners on iPads, for example. So safe area isn't a good idea here. So we're going to actually modify this thing to not be safe area, but instead be super view. go right to the very edge of the screen, including under the rounded corners. And I'll do the same thing for all of our items. Not safe area, but super view for all four of these things. That's super view trailing, that's safe area top, you'll be super view. At safe area bottom, you are also super view, like that. I've used React Native, go fudge yourselves. It's perfectly fine. It's not as bad as folks think. It's not as nice as UIKit by a long way, but it's perfectly fine. I have very few thoughts on Flutter. Anyway, that's now pinned our background image view so it fills the whole screen there as a background image. However, we want to show another image view on top. One to show our quote. We're not going to use a UI label. We're going to render it into a UI image view, and you're going to see why later on. So I'm going to go ahead and drag out a new image view. And because this contains important text, this is going to contain our quote text, this thing needs to be inside the safe area, below the notch, inside rounded corners and so forth. Because it contains important text. The image view can go under that stuff. It doesn't really matter if it gets cropped by rounded corners. The text does matter. This is the important motivational text application, right? This has got to be inside the rounded corners. So I'm going to, again, control drag from here and choose leading, top, trailing, bottom. And for each of these things, I'm going to pin it to the edge. So I'm going to say 0, and then 0, 0, 0. Boom, like that. So we have two image views overlapping each other with one ever so fractionally bigger. I wonder, go fudge yourselves, if you want to save the random questions until the very end. Otherwise, it's going to get very hard for folks to follow. If you've got questions about what I'm doing, go ahead and ask. Otherwise, leave it to the very end. So we have now an iPad landscape design with two fairly simple views on top. One bigger image view and one slightly smaller image view. That's basically our UI, for now at least. We'll come back and modify it later, but for now that is good enough. So what we're going to do is we're going to make some outlets for this thing. So in here, I'm going to say the background image view, the bigger one, I'll control drag into here and call this thing background. Background. And its top one, I'll control drag into here and call quote. Boom. Okay. So we've got the background and the quote as two image views on the canvas. Now, what we don't want to do is have UIKit's default rendering for these things. You'll see it's by default set to scale to fill, which basically stretches a thing to fit the space available, which just looks lame usually. It's very fast, but it doesn't look great. A better solution for the background is to say, instead, I'm going to use aspect fill for the background. Always fill the available space, including that means cropping off stuff. And then for quote, we're going to say aspect fit. Make it fit into the thing. A question from Harry Thompson. How do you do assistant view below the interface? It's up here actually. Under view, assistant editor, you can choose bottom or right. And which you're doing depends on how you work. Or if I'm doing like a code comparison, like doing TDD tests and the tests, the code, sorry, I'll have code and then tests on either side. Whereas when I'm doing IB stuff, I prefer stacked vertically. So yeah, it's a good thing to do it that way. So we have two image views fitting correctly. We've got outlets for them. That's basically our UI. Now I want to give you the URL so you can download the assets for yourself. So I'm going to copy this to my clipboard and paste it into the chat window. The URL is this big old thing here into the chat window. Like that. Okay. That should give you, I hope, the inner piece zip file containing the assets. Please don't all download it at once because that's going to hammer my server. I'm doing this 100 days of Swift challenge right now, which is very popular, and it at itself is taking a lot of CPU time on my server. If you aren't following along, you want to go to this URL, hackingswift.com/100, and that's very popular right now. Go and check it out. But in the meantime, grab your assets if you want them. Question from Subin. Why not use weak outlets? Because you don't need to. You don't need to. You can use strong outlets. It's perfectly fine. It makes no difference realistically, and I love getting rid of code. Weak makes no difference there, so I always zap that if possible. Anyway, once you have that zip file, you will end up with a directory like this. A lot of pictures. That's a zip file you just downloaded. A lot of pictures like this. inspirational sort of landscape shots. Look how pretty these are. They are all from Unsplash, which is an open source, well, not open source, sorry, a collaborative picture distribution system where people upload their pictures completely free of charge. You haven't even got to credit the author unless you really want to. Commercially, not commercially, do whatever you want. Just don't recreate Unsplash is their license. Now, if you want to give credit, I have named these pictures after the photos of the author. So you can see Jeff King at 2x, that is by Jeff King. Jeremy Bishop and so forth is by Jeremy Bishop. So if you want to give credit, you can do this right there in the file name. Please do. Getting an error on 100. Really? Okay, it's better. Great. Now what you'll see is also in there is two JSON files, one called pictures.json and one called quotes.json. And what we're going to do is we're going to drag those two JSON files into our Xcode project and copy them in. And I'm going to drag all the pictures into my asset catalog. So not these two, but these two, like this. Boom, like that. Now just quickly, let's have a look at the JSON here because it's worth seeing what they do. Pictures is just an array of strings. Just an array, literally array of the file names we have to work with. So we can look at that one thing immediately and see, boom, here are the images to work with. In quotes, it's slightly more complex because we have the quote text and we have the quote author every single time. So lots of these things whizzing down. So this thing, pictures.json, we can parse that into an array of strings because that's what it is. That's all it is, an array of strings. Whereas quotes.json, we can't. There's got actual data inside it. We've got to make a custom type for that called, quote with a text and author field. So we've got to do a bit more work there. Either way, this is a JSON file in our bundle that we want to load into some sort of decodable type. So that means writing some code decoding. Now, because we're doing it twice, I nearly always add an extension to do this for me. I'm not going to copy and paste it. I'll show you how it works. It's not terribly hard. I prefer to write an extension. Question from Andy. Change the view as. You could do. The UI here is so trivial. I wouldn't be terribly worried. I mean, this is our UI at this point. So I'm not particularly worried about the UI not really fitting. Anyway, let's go ahead and make an extension so we can do decoding JSON from bundles more easily. So I'll press Command N, then choose a new Swift file. I'll call this thing bundle decoding.swift. Boom. And I'm going to say extension bundle. Bundle. So we're going to do func decode some kind of T that's decodable using generics. Has to be a string or an array of whatever. And we'll have to tell it what type to do. So I'm going to say t.type from file string returns a T. Let me make this window slightly bigger and maybe make Xcode wrap its text as well. Xcode preferences. In here, there we go. Boom. So you can see more clearly what I'm doing. So I'm going to decode some sort of decodable thing from our bundle, and this takes a few steps. So the first thing we're going to do is find where this is in our bundle. So we'll do guard let URL equals bundle, self dot URL for resource, the file name we just passed in, with the extension nil. Else, fatal error, failed to locate file in app bundle. Great. Next up, we're going to go ahead and pull that into some data. We're going to say guard let data equals try question mark. Data content of some URL is our URL. Else fatal error, failed to load file in app bundle. Great. You'll know I'm a prolific user of fatal error for actual mistakes. So yes, you should be able to scroll up in the chat window if you missed the assets link, by the way. It's just there in the chat window, hopefully. Next we're going to get decoder, so we'll do decoder equals a JSON decoder. And then from here, we can go ahead and decode that into some T. So we'll do guard let loaded equals try decoder.decode t.self from data else fatal error failed to decode file from app bundle. Boom. Finally, return loaded. Should compile cleanly. Great. So you can see I've got fatal error 3 times in here, and I am totally cool with that. I know a lot of folks don't like fatal error. It unconditionally crashes your app. I am totally cool with it. What we're saying here is load this JSON from my app bundle. If we can't find it in the app bundle, that's a fundamental coder error. Get out of there. If we can't read it in the app bundle, it's a fundamental system problem. Get out of there. If we can't decode it to the thing we thought it was, fundamental program error. Get out of there. These are not mistakes you can make by accident at runtime. These are logic errors. Your code is wrong. Fatal error is perfectly the right place to use them here. So now we're going to go ahead and use this thing to make our data load from the bundle. Now I've shown you already pictures.json is an array of strings, which is fine. Question, will the decoder work if the JSON file is an object and not a JSON array? Yes, it will decode anything you want. You tell it what you want to do. So yes. So pictures.json is a load of strings, which is fine. But the quotes file, this is not. This is text and authors. We've got to make a custom decodable struct to make that work. So I'll say command N, new Swift file. Call this thing quote.swift. And then I'll do struct quote is codable. Oops, codable. Var text is a string. And then var author is a string. So some sort of codable quote like that. With that in place, we can now make properties in our view controller to decode those two from disk in just one line of code. So I'll say let quotes equals bundle.main.decode. The type is going to be an array of quote.self, and the string will be quotes.json. And then for the pictures, we'll do let images equals bundle main array of string from pictures.json. Boom, whoops, boom. That should work. So if it has worked, I press Command R to kick that off. Just if it hasn't worked, if I've made some fundamental coding error, we'll know in a few seconds, because it's going to try and find those JSON files in our bundle. It'll try and decode them to data, it'll try and decode them into objects and so forth. So we'll know very quickly what I've screwed up, if anything, of course. If we see a white screen with no crashes, it means it's a good thing. It'll work correctly, which is exactly what we want to see. JSON file versus model of array. Model, data should be stored in JSON or XML or somewhere else, not in your code if possible. Salmon, I don't use core data with codable. I just don't. Sorry. If the API return object and not an array, yes. So this particular question, this particular code MS, is designed to load from a bundle. There's no API involved here, so there's no question of it crashing because it suddenly changed. It's in the bundle. It must be incorrect. That's exactly how it must be. It must be in there correctly because we made it in the bundle. Now, if you're working in an API, fine. You can be more careful. Check this, check that, and so forth. You might say sometimes get an array of objects, sometimes a single object. Although it's not great, you might just still do it. It's down to you. But yeah, you're more careful with third-party code because it's not under your control. Bulgarka Olayosh. I'm hungry. Again. Nekem voneg meglipetation. My wife's Hungarian. Anyway. Why do we put .self? Because we're referring to the type. We're not trying to create an array of quotes. We're referring to the type, array or quote itself, referring to the thing, the concept, rather than an array of quotes directly. And yes, the code for the project will be online on our GitHub later on. I think it's already been linked up before in the chat. Anyway, the code is working great. We're loading quotes.json and pictures.json correctly, which is fantastic. The next thing we're going to do is try and do the main chunk of work for this project, which is rendering a quote to the screen somehow. So I'll make a method called funcUpdateQuote. This is going to do the main chunk of work for rendering quotes to the screen. And there's quite a lot to do here because we want to update the background image, and then create a new image we can render into, add in that text and so forth, and make it all look fairly good. We're going to make this slightly better later. This is sort of a first pass right now, just to get an idea of how it's going to work. So the first thing I'm going to say is guard let background image name equals images.random element. Give me one random item from our image array. And if that failed, you've fundamentally screwed up, unable to read an image. If your images array is empty, something's gone wrong. Anyway, and we'll assign that straight to our background. So do background.image equals UI image named background image name. Boom. We'll do the same thing for our quote. We'll say guard let selected quote equals quotes dot random element else fatal error, unable to read a quote. Again, should never happen, but no, I'm having it in there. Is it good practice to start with using private making a func? I don't know. I wouldn't. I don't think I'd necessarily say it's good practice or bad practice. It's not a strong enough convention that I would do it, if that makes sense. I will usually do it retroactively when I'm like preparing an API to be used by someone else. I will go through and say no, private, all the way down to make it clear what my internal things are. But at the same time, when you do that, it makes it harder to test because you can't reach into private things so much. You only want to test the actual API surface area you have. Anyway, so we've got a background image, we've got a quote. Now comes the challenging piece of code. We want to render this quote into an image at the right size for our screen. But of course, we want to make it look fairly pretty. So we want to kind of pull it in from the edges by some amount. I'm going to just insert some numbers, but some amount. Make it sort of centered nicely on the screen. This takes actually more work than you might expect, but I'll try and break it down as we go. So the first thing we're going to do is figure out the amount of space we have to draw into. Now we've got this big image view, our quote image, and we want to render something smaller than that. So we're going to insert on every edge by a certain amount. So I'm going to say my draw bounds equals quote dot bounds, the size of the quote thing, dot inset by some amount. And I'm going to say UI edge inset of some amount. And I'm going to say let inset amount equals 250. Some big number. That's probably a bit too much, but you get the idea. Some number in there. Oops. So quote amount, what was it? Inset amount, sorry. Inset amount. Boom, boom. So basically pull that whole rect in by a certain amount on every edge so it looks a bit nicer. Now we can use that to figure out how to draw our image. Now we're going to do something quite interesting here. I want to draw the text on the screen at a nice looking size. And we could, of course, very easily pick a size that's sensible. Say, okay, size 80 fits all our quotes. But I'm going to take something, a more complex / stupid solution. we're gonna try and draw as large as possible each time. And I'm doing this just because it's more interesting. It's a live stream, might as well be slightly challenging for ourselves here. We're gonna try and draw it as big as possible. And to do that, we're gonna say, get our text, render it really big, and see if it fits. If it doesn't, go slightly smaller. Does that fit? Go slightly smaller. Does that fit? Does that fit? Does that fit? Da-da-da. And we find the exact size that fits the quote we have. So always go as large as it can to fill the space we have. This is actually surprisingly fast, by the way. Don't worry, it's not me viciously slow at all. So what we're going to say our quote rect, the size in which our quote fits, is going to start off as a CG rect with x positions being 0, y being 0. The width, I'm going to use dot greatest finite magnitude. Go really big on the width, basically infinitely sized. And height, also greatest finite magnitude. So supersized in both directions. So we don't really care how big it is at this point. Basically an infinite size drawing space to work with. And as we go, we're going to ask the the string how big space it actually needs, and it will decrease down to a realistic value, not infinite or nearly infinite. So that's our quote rect. Now we're going to say our font size. It's the CG float. I'm going to start off really big at 120. 120 will not fit some of the quotes in our example text. It just won't fit. But that's fine because it's a variable. We're going to lower it as we go. And then we'll say var font is a UI font. It's implicitly unwrapped here. We don't know what it is yet. We'll be setting it as we go. Hold still. I'm not quite sure what your question's about, Harry. So Agito, your question about the image view having insets and margins, we're actually going to add multiple sets of insets as we go, and you'll kind of see why. Doing it in code gives us slightly more flexibility than doing it in a storyboard, because we can change our mind based on the device. We can say, in portrait, do this much, and landscape, split view, do that much, or whatever. We can have more flexibility by doing it in code. I'm not going to add it here, but... greatest finite magnitude. No, that's fixed at a CG float value of some very, very large number, which I'm not sure what it is, actually, but I have no idea what it is, but it's large. Anyway. So we're going to have some sort of font. We don't really know what font is yet, but it'll start at 120 something or other. And we're also going to have some sort of attributes dictionary we're working with, which will be for NS attributed string. Because these things have a really nice, clean drawing API to work with. Again, this will be implicitly unwrapped. We'll be modifying this as we go. And then for the string, again, this will be an NS attributed string. Implicitly unwrapped, we'll be modifying it as we go. So we'll create it again and again and again until we find one that fits. So we'll do while true. Now in here, the first thing we're going to do is say, okay, make a new UI font at our current font size, the one we think might fit. 120, probably not, but it might. So we'll say font equals a UI font with the name Georgia Italic. Size is font size. Now if you wanted to, you could use, nil coalescing UI font dot system font of size. System font of size 120, like that. 120. That's the safe way of doing it. If you're feeling a bit sort of evil, say, I'm sure Georgia Italic will always exist in future versions of iOS. Good luck with that. You can force unwrap it like that. It's down to you, whatever makes you feel happy. So we'll make a font. And for the attributes, we're going to say attributes, or attrs, equals dot font is our font, the one we've made. And our foreground color, equals UI color dot white. So render the text in nice white. And now I want to do our sizing. And the sizing works by making an attributed string. And we can say, make it with our text, make it with our attributes, and then measure it. So we're going to say stir equals NS attributed string. String is our selected quote dot text. And the attributes is attrs, like that. So make a string with that exact formatting, that font size and so forth. And now we can measure it and use that to replace our big quote rect. This thing here, this greatest finite magnitude quote rect here. Get an actual size of the thing we're working with. So we're going to say quote rect equals stir dot bounding rect. And this will ask you what kind of size do you want to work with, what width and height you want to try and figure out inside, what drawing options do you want, what drawing context do you want. That lets us work in the multiple threads if you really want to. In our case, we're going to tell it, listen, this is the biggest size you can work with, the drawing bounds. I think we calculated already with our insets everywhere. That's our drawing bounds to work with. So I'm going to say for our size, it's going to be, hold a second, I've clicked the wrong window there. There we go. It's going to be CG size with the width being drawbounds.width. I've got an error somewhere, I wonder what it is. And the height is going to be, again, we don't really care. All we care is the width is fixed in this bit. The height, honestly, it doesn't matter. So we're going to say, again, dot greatest finite magnitude. Just take up all the height you like. What matters is you don't go any wider than that. For options, there are a number of NS string drawing options we can work with, but the only actual one we care about is called uses line fragment origin, which is a bizarre way to name this thing. What it means is that how it renders the baseline, but it actually enables correct multi-line string rendering. It's like, thanks for that, Apple. And the documentation even says, use this thing if you want multi-line string rendering, but they could just call it, multi-line string rendering, please, or something like that. Context nil. Let's use the current drawing context. Again, it's great because you can measure these things in a background context if you want to. If you want to render a few ahead of time, for example. Like if you made this app output 20 images rendered beautifully, then to have in their photo library or their home screen or whatever, that's how you do it in the background. Anyway, I press Command B, trying to see what my error is. Ooh, yeah, it's errors all over the place. It's not sure what it is here. Of course, because it could be an int as well. So I'll just do CG float here. That'll make it much happier. Boom, boom, boom. You're complaining. Oops, you have a mistake right there. It should be a string key. My mistake. Build still failing. Oh, what? You use CG float as well? I should press Command B more often. Okay. It is still failing. Else. Look at these. Come on, folks. You're in the chat window here. You're supposed to be telling me about these errors I'm making in my typing. Okay. Now it's building. Hurrah. Step forward. So our quote rect now tells us how much space it's going to take up. It's fixed to a width. We can now read the height. Did you fit into the space we actually have or not? If it's too long, then it means it's just the font's too big, so it isn't going to fit. It'll overflow in our space we have. So we can say if quote rect.height is greater than drawbounds.height, then we want to say font size minus equals 4. Some amount. Take away the font a little bit. So go 120, 116, 112, 108, and so forth, down to, 4. 0 ultimately if it has to. Else break. So if we hit here, it means our quote fits in the width and fits in the height. So quote rect is now the correct size to fit the actual string we want to have. And stir set the actual string we want to have, and font's correct and attributes is correct. It's all correct to work with. So at this point, after this loop, we know for sure we can draw correctly into this space. So we're going to go ahead and render into our image view by first saying make a format, which is a UI graphics renderer, image renderer format, like that, and then format.opaque equals false, so it's transparent in the background. Kabir, local computed properties, no, it really wouldn't. I mean, I think local computed variables are so rarely used in Swift that, yeah, I'm not really sure it's a good idea. Would a repeat while look nicer there? Yeah, I mean, it's not. I'm not terribly worried by that, but yeah, sure. You could do repeat while and then have the condition being quote rect height and so forth, but I'm not terrifically worried about that. That's our thing, our format, and now we can create a UI graphics image renderer by saying let renderer equals UI graphics image renderer, with the bounds being the actual rect we have to work with, which is our quote rect, and our format being format. Like that. So make this thing the right size and transparent, like that. And finally, we can say quote.image equals renderer.image ctx in stir.draw in quote rect, like that. Command B. Any mistakes? Looking good. Okay. Of course, we're going to call this thing at some point, so we'll have viewed layout subviews, super.viewed layout subviews, and then update quote. Boom. So hopefully, if I haven't massively screwed up that big chunk of code, when I press Command R, we're going to see something actually useful. Let's find out. Oh, look at that. Great. Satisfaction can be found in the simplest of tasks. Tell that to Swift. Anyway. Kabir, make an algorithm binary search? I think perhaps you are overestimating what's possible to do in a 1 hour live stream, Kabir. Yes, making it slightly smarter than subtracting 4 would be good. Yes, of course it would be good. I'm not terribly interested in well actuallys, honestly. Anyway, we've got a working app, which is great. It's not ideal. I think the text is rather hard to read. If I look at it again, you'll see it's, in fact, very hard to read. We can do better than that. So what we're going to do is add a nice shadow behind this thing so we can see the text more clearly. So in our rendering thing, before draw in, we're going to say ctx.cgcontext.setShadow. Well, Alexito, good question, maybe more margins, but think about the answer first. Think about the code we wrote versus what we can see on the screen and see what conclusion you come to. ctx.cgcontext.setShadow. This takes an offset and blur. So I'm going to say offset will be just 0, just focus around the thing, and blur will be 10, and then color will be just UI color.black.cgcolor. I think it's default. I'll try that, and hopefully it'll look slightly better. Let's find out. Yeah, that's definitely looking better, right? Now, what I want to do really is make it so that when the user clicks the screen or taps the screen, they're going to see different quotes. So down here, we're going to say touches began. Oops, touches began. And then we'll say update quote. Abdul, is it good to use color literals? I never use color literals. I find them weird. Okay, there's our quote. Taps the different ones. That's kind of working. You know, it's kind of working. You can see the font size varies down from big down to smaller. It's sizing it correctly. It's centering all nicely, which is exactly how you wanted. It more or less works. It's a little bit hard to read sometimes. Yeah, it's not great sometimes. Some of the pictures are quite light and they don't look great with the quote text, like around here, for example. But it kind of works. Now we can actually, because we're rendering the whole thing as an image, the text, I mean, as an image, we can actually do better with the shadow because if we're using a UI label, we could do a shadow as well, right? Just do a regular shadow using the CA layer probably behind it. But when you start using an image like we're doing here, we have more control over the shadow because it's flexible. What we can actually do is we can deepen the shadow. Now what you're seeing here is called set shadow here. We're going to have 10 blur, color black. It can't get any stronger than this. You make it more blurry, you can't make it any darker. It's already on maximum darkness. However, we can cheat, right? Because it's our image, we can do whatever we want to. We can actually go ahead and render the text multiple times with the same shadow. And the text will look the same, it's white text, but the shadow will get darker and darker and darker, and we do it. And if we do it carefully, by expanding the shadow in each loop, we can make the shadow darker in the nearest bit, then less dark, less dark, less dark. It'll look really, really nice on the screen. So, what we're going to say is, in here, when we're rendering this thing, we're going to say for I in 1 through 5. I'll just tab in this code here, like that. So we can render it multiple times. Now, it's going to do 10 at the same strength right now. It's not really what we want. What we really want is CG float I times 2. So it'll get bigger and bigger and bigger as we go. Hopefully. Boom. Let's try that. Should get a nice darker shadow. There we go. Super dark shadow now. So it's really legible now. Even if folks aren't so good with the sight, it's looking more flexible and more legible, which is great. And, it's almost super black around the text, like a stroke almost, because we've rendered the shadow so many times around it. And I should say, this is lightning fast. I know in a simulator it's not great because it's not a great fast simulator, the iPad one, but trust me, on devices this is lightning fast. Well, so a question from Alexito: do you have to re-render the text every time? Isn't it enough to render the shadow only? Well, the shadow is the text, and we only get the shadow by rendering the text. We call set shadow. You're saying everything I draw in the future should have a shadow attached to it of some shadow. So you'll then draw something to make the shadow appear. So it's not quite as simple. You have to say, just give me some shadow, please. Anyway, so it basically works. It looks great, I think. Nice and clear now, which is fantastic. But now we've got a problem. And I think it's pretty clear, hopefully, from the screen what's going on. What we're seeing is we're drawing badly. I mean, it really doesn't look great. The text goes right to the edge of our screen, so the shadow actually bleeds out of the screen, which isn't how we want it to be. And what's happening here is we're rendering our image view at the right size, the image quote, then placing inside an image view which is edge to edge and set to aspect fit. So it'll naturally stretch it upwards to fit the available space, which is not really what we want. So I'm going to modify that. Now, you've seen already in our code, we are measuring this thing correctly. We know it's going to fit in the available space. That's the design of this thing. So we're going to go to here and say this thing is not aspect fit. It's centered. Don't even scale it. Leave it at the scale we made it, so we've drawn it to the right scale. That was our job, measuring the thing at the right position, adding those insets correctly and so forth. And that's by design, right? So it should look correct now. And now you'll see it correctly insets the text. We get those nice borders we asked for in the first place. So it's looking better, I think. Oh, in acceptance there is peace. There you go. Tell that to Swift compiler. So that's one problem fixed. But there's another problem. And you can see it here. If you look really carefully on my text, you can see the left-hand edge's eye isn't shadowed, and the bottom of this P isn't shadowed. Because what's happening is we're rendering it kind of edge to edge, leaving no room for little curls on text, no room for shadows around it and so forth. We need to give a little bit of breathing room to this thing. Because the shadow isn't inside our calculations. When we're saying, render out exactly the right size of text and so forth, it isn't quite right. And some things, particularly in italic text like Georgia, like the Fs, with a lovely little curl in the end, they often get cropped off, which isn't ideal. But here particularly, the shadows are getting lost on the very, very edges, because that wasn't part of our size calculation. So we're going to add a little bit of breathing room to our image, just a small amount, so it isn't going to get cropped quite so easily. And to do that, we're making our renderer here at a certain size, bounds quote rect. Use the exact size of the text measured badly by UIKit to draw things into. We don't want that. We want to do is say inset that by some amount. Now I'm going to use not inset by edge insets, as that one actually annoys me. I want to do inset by dxdy some amount, and I'm going to use about -30. I think it's enough. Just a bit of breathing room around the text, enough for any little flourish of text, enough for our shadow to go beautifully around the text without being cropped. Our shadow is 5 times 2 at its greatest, so 10 points. So there's lots of breathing room here for text. So I'll press Command R and see what we get. There we go. That's looking much, much nicer. So now we're seeing things look better on the screen. It's correctly giving us a little bit of breathing room around the text. The shadow goes edge to edge beautifully. It's looking much, much nicer. Yeah. Oh, this is a really sweet application, right? But that's actually quite legible at this point. You could then say if you want to, add a UI view behind it, the right size, width and height, which has got a sort of a slightly transparent black background to have extra legibility if you really wanted it and so forth. But at this point, it's fine. I mean, that's readable to me, but it's your application, right? You can do what you like afterwards. So that kind of works as an application, right? If I look at this code, I would dearly love to pull this apart. You'll know if you watch the previous Swift on Sundays live streams, you'll know I love pulling apart code and getting it neatly filed away out of the view controller. We might have time for that a bit later, perhaps. We're already 47 minutes in, sadly. I want to add some more features. I want to look at some actual new interesting things to look at, so you learn, hopefully, something new along the way. So in main.storyboard, I'm going to add a new button in here. And I'll drag it into the top right corner. Hi Chris Stapps, dad jokes. I can't keep on doing the dad jokes. People will stop coming. They're going to unsubscribe if I give them too many dad jokes. So I've got to try and mix up a little bit, you know. This button I'm going to pin to the top trailing edge of the safe area. So always float the top right corner of the thing. And then for the button, I'm going to say you are the word share. And I'm going to give this thing a nice, obvious background color. So blackish, so none of this stuff, none of this stuff, none of this stuff. So black, but, you know, slightly translucent black, so kind of blackish. Like that. It doesn't look good when it goes edge to edge, I think. It looks a bit rubbish, in fact. So I'm going to actually make this slightly bigger. Make it like 44 high by 80 wide, like that. 44, by the way, is not just a random number I got out of my head. That's the number Apple recommends as the smallest button should be to be tappable. It's a really sad thing that UI button doesn't sort of use that as its default content size, but it doesn't, so we'll do it for it. I'm going to give it constraints to fix the width and height. So it'll always be at least exactly 80 by 44. So top right corner, nice big button like that. The color's blue, which looks rubbish. I'll use white. Boom. That's our share button. When that's tapped, I want to share this quote somehow. So I'm going to go to Assistant Editor and make an outlet or action, for this button down here. I'll control drag into there. Call this thing share tapped. There we go. Great. Okay. Back into the view controller again. Now, to make sharing work, we have to stash away the quote that was selected somehow. Because right now, this hideous update quote method is doing most of the work for us. It's saying, you know, get a quote out, run it to the screen, update the UI. A lot of work in there. I'm not going to fix that just yet, but a lot of work in there that isn't ideal. But we do need to use this thing to stash away the quote that was chosen somewhere. So we can then use that inside the share tapped method. So we can actually do something with the thing that was chosen. So we'll make a new property up here. We'll say var share quote is some kind of quote that was chosen. Optional quote like that. And then down in our update quote method, we have, you know, get a random quote from the array, which is fine. At this point, we want to store that away in our property. So I'm going to say share quote equals selected quote. Just stash it away for later on so we know what quote was selected. Then down in share tapped, here we go. We can start using that thing. We're going to say guard let quote equals share quote, else fatal error, attempting to share a non-existent quote. Bad idea. I have seen your blog. It's WatchOS, right, Will? I think, is that right? I'm pretty sure I've seen it. I do read. I do spend a lot of time reading, you know. In fact, I saw Chris Stapp's blog entry as well. Blogging's the new thing. It's just great. I love seeing more folks writing. It's great. We're going to now format the quote nicely. So we'll do let share message equals. Let's do a quote mark, then quote dot text, and then another quote mark. Nice long dash. It's going to be quote dot author, like that. So it'll say, you know, unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. Leo Tolstoy. Not very motivational, but the only quote I can think of off the top of my head. We now have a quote message like that. We can now put that into a UI activity view controller. So I'll say let AC equals UI activity view controller, with the items being our share message. And page activities is nil. And we do need to set the popover presentation control for this thing because it's an iPad. It has to know where the thing's being triggered from. Otherwise, you'll get a little system crash going on. It isn't ideal. What we want to do is tell it where to render from. Now we have the sender and it's any right now, so I'm going to make this thing UI button instead, so we know what tapped it. And this thing, we're going to say your source view equals our sender, like that. So that formats the quote nicely. It tells it where to appear. We can now call present AC animated true, like that. Show it on the screen. And I press Command R to build and run. I wonder if you're confusing Will Bishop with Wayne Bishop, Mr. Nickhog, only because they have similar last names. You cannot perceive beauty but with a serene mind. Beautiful. Anyway, I'm going to press share. And there we go. It appears correctly. Obviously, it's the simulator. I haven't got much to share it with. But if I press copy, I can hopefully see how it looks. So I press copy and then go to, let's go to iMessage perhaps. Where's that? There's messages. Oh, down here. Right, there you go. Messages. Yep, thank you. I am John Appleseed. I will paste that in here. Paste. Beautiful. So I can now text great quotes to my best friend, who is Kate Bell, it turns out. Send. There you go, Kate. Enjoy that. Lovely. Anyway, great. So that is correct to getting the quote to the clipboard, well, activity view controller, which is fantastic. The next step, and this is the interesting step really, we want to tell folks some sort of motivational quote every day. Like, wake up, it's 10 a.m, here's a great quote to get you started, because some folks really do get inspired by some words against a pretty picture. I am not one of them, as you might have guessed, but I know many, many folks are. So, we're going to use the iOS or macOS as well, user notifications framework. So I'm going to go up to the top here and go to import and do import user notifications, which is a lovely way of doing notifications. Now with these things, of course, you've got to ask for permission to show them. So I'm going to say UN user notification center dot current, which is a method, thanks for that, Apple, dot request authorization. Request authorization. So we can tell it what we want to do, and the answer is we want to show alerts, we want to show sounds maybe, like that. And for completion handler, we're going to say, are we allowed, or was there an error coming in? And if we're allowed, we're going to call a method we haven't written yet called configure alerts. So ask for permission to show alerts and sounds. If we get back true or false, if it's true, we'll call configure alerts. So I'll make a method down here somewhere. Func configure alerts. Oops. This is going to be another pretty nasty method, to be honest with you. This is where we're going to do all the work of actually making these alerts. So we'll say, first up, our center is going to be un user center.current, again, with a method called blech. The first thing we're going to do is remove any things we've added already. So we'll say center.remove all delivered notifications and center.remove all pending notifications. So we're asking it, if it's delivered or pending, we don't care, get rid of them all. Now the reason we're doing this is because we're going to make these notifications every single time they come back to the app. We don't want to keep on making new ones every time. We want to delete whatever's there and then remake new ones. Otherwise, you end up with hundreds of notifications potentially, which is a bad idea. Trust me, the users would not like you. So now we can start saying, give me 5 random alerts, quotes. Sorry, and we don't want to call random element here because we could potentially get back the same thing multiple times in a row, which isn't ideal. So we're going to instead say shuffle the array of quotes and give me back that shuffled array. So I'll say let shuffled equals quotes dot shuffled. That. So we're going to get back, hopefully, lots of quotes we can start using. And now we can say for I in 1 through 5. So we're going to count upwards, 5 days of notifications. Maybe you can do a week, perhaps 7 maybe. Give me a whole week of notifications planned ahead of time. Show them 1 a day so they can get back to the app regularly. And for our content, we use a thing called UN mutable notification content, which has a title, which will be inner piece, and body will be shuffled I.text. So whatever quote was selected. Now for a bit of complexity. We want to show these things 1 day from now, 2 days from now, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days from now. And that actually takes more work than you might think. So let's go ahead and look at it. First, we create a new instance of date components. So I'll do var date components equals an instance of date components, capital D, and my date components dot day equals I. So saying 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, nothing else. No year, month, whatever. Just 1 day, 2 days, 5 days, and so forth. And now we can call a method on calendar by saying, give me a date by adding these date components to this other date, like now. Add 1 day to now, add 5 days to now, and so forth. Now, cunningly, perhaps because of ultimate heat death, this thing returns an optional. So we have to unwrap that carefully. So we'll say if let alert date equals calendar dot current dot date by adding date components to date. I'm going to say my date components to right now. Add 1 day to now, add 2 days to now, add 3 days by now, and so forth. Should it be outside the loop? Well, I guess you could move that outside the loop, but this bit needs to be in there. You're not really saving particularly much on that one, but I can see what you mean. You could do it that way if you want to. So if we are able to add 1 day to the current date, which I hope the answer is true, but you never know. Now what we want to do is pull out the date components from that. We want to say, hey date, give me your day, your month, and your year. And we'll provide the time, but the day, month, and year we do care about. Having iOS do this is much, much, much better than trying to do, 1 times 86,400. And I've done that. I've totally done that. It doesn't work with, savings time and daylight time and so forth. It doesn't work with going across backwards the other way as well. So it's complicated. So it's a good idea to use these kinds of things. Anyway, we're going to say get our alert date components. So we're going to say alert components equals calendar.current.date components, and then we're going to pass this thing as a set from a date. So the set we're going to pass is give me the day, give me the month, and give me the year to show this thing. And it's going to be from our alert date. So tell me the day, month, the year to show this alert based on 1 day from now, 2 days from now, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and similar. Yeah, Alito, time is weird. You're absolutely right. It's hella complicated. Well, I'm not sure that's exactly why it would not return nil. Because, obviously some dates don't exist, but it should return something. If it changes time zone, that time still exists somewhere. Add 1 day to now does not exist anymore. It still exists, just not the exact time I thought it would be. It'd be 1 hour behind or half an hour behind or whatever. Some weird time difference. There's probably another reason. I'm not quite sure what it is. Anyway, that's our alert components. What we do care about though is that the alert components .hour is 10. Always show at 10 a.m. And the minute, seconds will be 0 and so forth. But day, month, and year is calculated by iOS. The hours are going to be forced in at 10. We're going to always show at 10 o'clock. Now, normally what we'd write here is something like this. Let trigger equals, when do you want to show this alert? UN calendar. Oh, no, it's UN, yes, calendar. Notification trigger. There we go. With date matching our alert components, components, repeats false. That's normally what we'd write here. Make me a trigger, show us alert 1 day, 2 days, 7 days from now, and so forth. I'm going to comment that out because even though it's important, we can't use it here. Otherwise, we have to wait 24 hours to show you the results of this thing, which would be very annoying. We're going to sort of do a hacky, cheaty workaround here. We're going to say let trigger equals a UN time interval notification trigger, which is based on a time from now. This will ask for a time interval. I'm going to say time interval of I times 5. So it'll be 5 seconds, 10, 15, 20, 25 from now. so we can see a preview of how these alerts look. Again, repeats false, otherwise it'll go nuts. We don't want that. And then we take our content, the quote, our trigger, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever, from now, tie them together into a single request by saying let request equals UN notification, come on, note request. There we go. Identifier. This is so you can pull it later on if you want to. You can say, remove that particular one. We don't care here. We're going to remove them all. So we're going to do UID string. Boom. Content is going to be our content, and trigger is going to be our trigger. So that's our finished request to show this thing in 5 seconds time and so forth. So we can now say our center dot add that request, and if we get an error in, which it could happen if they said no to a certain thing, for example, we'll just do if let error equals error, print error dot localize description. Boom. Obviously add some sort of error there. This shouldn't be called if they have not granted permission, so I think we're fairly okay with that. Anyway, let's give it a try. Let me just check my volume's low, otherwise we hear things. I haven't actually attached a sound, so I shouldn't hear any noises. I'll press Command R to build and run. Boom, there's our alert. Alerts and so forth. Yes. I'll press Command L to lock the screen. And hopefully, boom, in a piece. Peace of mind is attained not by ignoring problems, but by solving them. Oh, that's deep. Another one after another 5 seconds. So it should come in every 5 seconds, a new quote each time. Be happy in the moment. That's enough. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, motivational. Get to work, Hopefully one more, and we're done. Boom. So that's it working over 25 seconds. Lots of quotes arriving. There's more. Oh, did I say 7 days? Of course, it's 7 days. Phew. So more than 25 seconds, perhaps. And look at that. It's even collapsed more beautifully. Well done, iOS. Anyway, so it's now showing notifications. Now, again, in your own code, you wouldn't necessarily want to use this interval thing. You want to use an actual calculation instead to account for time zone changes and similar. But for testing purposes, by all means, do that. Now, it is 11:05. We've gone over our hour by 4 minutes, which isn't bad, I think, quite frankly. So if you want to, we could do a bit of refactoring. Well, not refactoring, tearing apart, quite frankly. I really hate code like this, dumping it on the view controller. We can look at a few quick fixes to this, make this code nicer, because this code disgusts me right now. Gives me like an eye twitch. Or if you have questions, we can go into the questions. I don't really mind. It's your chance to go ahead and type something in the chat window. If you'd rather ask me questions about stuff, we can do questions. If you'd rather I apply some quick fixes to this code, make it a bit nicer, we can do quick fixes. I don't really mind. Looks like a refactoring's an early lead. I should say, while the rest of you are thinking, refactoring's a very complicated word, which is why I sort of switched to calling it tearing it apart. Refactoring is the process of making changes to your code for, maintainability reasons, for flexibility reasons, for performance reasons, for whatever reasons you like, where the end result is the same as your starting position, right? That's refactoring. That's what it means. And the only way of verifying that's correct is through testing. And we have no tests. So this is not refactoring, right? This is literally tearing the code to shreds and then reassembling it. We are already slightly over time, which isn't ideal, but I can do a few quick things to show you how I'd start thinking about this, because it isn't great right now. So anyway, the point is, while you've all been saying the word refactor in chat, generally I would not call this refactoring. Or if I would, I'd probably try and rephrase it as quickly as possible to be tear it apart or rewriting it, quite frankly, because it's not really refactoring. Anyway, what Mac do I use? I have a 2016 Touch Bar MacBook Pro 15-inch, and I hate it. I hate the keyboard. I've got an external Magis Touch Ninja mechanical keyboard, which sounds like a machine gun going off when I'm using it. So I put it to one side and I'm typing on my laptop this time because the keys are much quieter. But yeah, I hate the keyboard, hate the touch bar. It's not a great laptop. But the problem is I'm stuck with it, right? I want Apple to release an ARM one of these things so I can switch across to it. Better keyboard, no touch bar, you know. So I'm kind of waiting for an ARM switch before I upgrade, which is annoying me because it might be a while. Anyway, it looks like you've nearly all voted for rewriting, which is great. So I said already over time, so I haven't got too much time to do this, but I'll look at you, give you an idea of where I would at least start, because it isn't great right now. So, as an example, let's have a look. I'm going to pull out here. Okay, here we go. This kind of thing. This is a really easy one to fix up. Really easy one to fix up, because this is our view controller deciding how to format quotes, which isn't ideal. So we want to fix it up a little bit. So we don't want that. We want to pull that out and put that inside the quote. Let the quote decide how to format things. So I'm going to press Command X, yoink that out, and put that into my quote file instead as a computed property. So we'll do var share message is a string, and then we'll just do return that. Boom. Nice and easy one to start off with. And now in our view controller, we don't want to do share message anymore. We want to do quote.shareMessage. So a few folks are saying the sound's going weird. There is literally nothing I can do about that. Oh, it's like an old engine. That's probably my laptop. That's probably this terrible Mac laptop. So that is, it's spinning up its fans to the maximum at this point. So I'm afraid there isn't much I can do about that. It's literally going nuts on the front. I can try and see what's using so much CPU time. And the answer is OBS, the thing I stream to Xcode with, to YouTube with. Oh, so is Backboard. Backboard's doing something. I can kill Backboard. Yeah, it's like a truck. Tell me about it. That's just that's my laptop's fans on this terrible laptop. Anyway, what's up with them, I'm afraid. Anyway, so I've yoinked out how we format quotes into the share thing. Simple change to make, nice and easy. What else can we do? Let's have a look. This kind of code here. This is calculating a date offset from now, again and again and again. This whole thing here, this code here. This is great reusable code. You know, this kind of thing doesn't need to be in there. This can be an extension on date instead. So I'm going to take out this thing. I'll copy it to the clipboard perhaps. Then press Command N. Then choose Swift file. I'll call this thing date future. Boom. So extension date. Paste that in there. I'm going to write this thing called func by adding days int. So you could say add 1 day, add 2 day, add 3 day to a date, and it'll do it nicely, which is great. So we're going to say the components, you're all good. Let's do days there rather than using I. And then we can just return from here directly this thing. Like that. Return calendar date current by adding components to self instead. And this thing is going to be a date coming back like that. And it's complaining because I've screwed something up. Of course, this is optional, which we can't do that. Instead, we'll just do self as a default date. Boom. Okay. So now we've taken that code and put it into a separate extension out of the way. It makes more sense there. It's more reusable there and so forth. Now we have all this code here can effectively go away because we don't need this anymore. We can now say instead zap, just let alert date equals the current date by adding I, like that, and scrap all this code here, like that. Boom. And get rid of the closing brace at the bottom. Lovely. Oops. That's much better. That isn't used, we get the idea. Boom. I'm going to build. Yeah, okay. Again, doesn't need to be in the view controller. That's not what it's there for. So just get out of the way, which is much, much nicer. What else can we get rid of? This is a nightmare method. Update quote. This is a terrible piece of code. I mean, it gets the job done, right? It does the job, but it's not smart. It's not testable. Because what it's doing is it's actually doing multiple things at the same time. We're seeing it is updating the UI here, picking out a quote, changing some state, rendering stuff, then putting that back into the UI again at the end. So there's all sorts of stuff going on here. This is a pretty nasty method. Really, we want to rip that out into sort of, update the UI and rendering at the very least, pull out a little bit. So I'm going to do func render selected quote, some quote, returns a UI image, like that. And then I'm going to basically take all this code, all this rendering code, out. All this stuff here, you all come out, and paste that into there. So all the rendering happens here. We don't want to do quote image equals that anymore. We want to just take that out and do return instead. So it comes back as a return value. It returns a UI image. And now you can call it from inside our update quote method. So we'll do something like quote.image equals render selected quote, like that. So that's better, because now there's a very clear responsibility of this just takes a quote and renders it out. And this becomes testable. It's not ideal still, because you're reading in this state here. You want to pass in those bounds directly rather than having to rely on the view existing. But at least now we can say, here's the exact quote to render, give me the image back, which you can then compare against a reference image doing snapshot testing, for example. So that's generally a better idea. And it means this method here is much simpler. It updates the UI and sets some state. I'd probably pull that apart slightly further. One to update the UI, one to pick a quote. But you get the idea. Okay, that is already now 11:15. I think that's enough coding for now. If you have questions, this is your chance to ask them. If you want anything else done, let me know. I can hang around for a while. What's the next topic? I don't know. I have no idea. I'm inclined to say testing, because so many folks have asked for testing Swift on Sundays. But I need to make sure it fits with my diary, which I don't actually look at very often, quite frankly. Yeah, so next Sunday, yeah, I suspect next Sunday could well be testing. So, yes, I think, let's say, next weekend, testing. Reese, genuinely, there's nothing I can do. It's plugged in directly to the laptop. It's reading correctly on the screen. I can see the thing up and down correctly. If it isn't coming out, there's nothing I can do about that, I'm afraid. Posting schedules, what to cover? I'm not quite sure what you mean there, Will. Sorry. Is it a good idea to shift rendering quote into a custom UI image view subclass? No, I wouldn't say so. Subclassing I generally don't like if it's avoidable. It creates very tight coupling, which isn't great. And it's, UI image view is a view level thing, and rendering is not. Rendering is a model data. UI image is model land, bluntly. It's not, even though you can see it, obviously, as it becomes an image view ultimately, it's still model data. You don't want to have that anywhere near any UI views of ideally. You want to get that out there entirely. Is the power plugged in my laptop? Yes, it is. It's plugged in. I use power nearly all the time. Testing, testing, testing. Read up one, Will. Okay. Okay. I will scroll further up, Will, to try and find your question. How far are we talking about here? Yeah, oh, here we are, right. It's a long way up. What I recommend to folks who are new to the sharing aspect of code? Consistency is important. Try and post something once every week, or once every 2 weeks, or once a month, whatever suits your schedule. Get something out there, even if it's short. Second, find your own tone. Don't try and be me. Don't try and be somebody else. Sean Allen does great blogs on video logs on YouTube. You can copy if you want to, but you'll be better as you find your own voice, find your own audience. It will suit you better. You'll be more natural rather than trying to do what I do or someone else does. So find your own voice and then be consistent is my advice. Question from Roberto: can you display notifications while the app running? Yes, you can. Of course you can. You'll receive a notification saying app alert was triggered. So you can then show some in-app alert if you really want to. It's really down to you. There is nothing to open the microphone. Seriously, I've got a big microphone arm across here, pointing just here. There's nothing touching it. It's floating in the air. It just, I don't know, sucks. Something's gone wrong. I'm not sure what. Questions. Is there a way to check in settings if you subscribe to notifications? Yes, you can check in there if you want to. We can't check there, I don't think. We have to ask for permission, I think. But you can read the alerts settings, can't you, I presume? In un center.current. In here somewhere, I expect. We've got access for, I'm guessing. Not seeing it currently. There you are. Get settings. There you go. So I'll tell you what you're allowed to do. If I wanted rounded corners, which approach do I choose? I just use CA layer. CA layer.rounded corner radius works great for me. That's fine. Should I remove them all and redo when vary for traits is active? Oh, for portrait and landscape mode. Well, I mean, you shouldn't need to necessarily do too much work. If you're having already adaptive UI, your UI should naturally fit portrait and landscape. If you have like say a split view controller, it'll look great in portrait on iPhone XS Max, and landscape will change to be left and right view controller correctly. If you're doing it well already using adaptive layouts, it should just work without size classes. But if you have to, then yes, you've got to go down size classes, which is a pain, quite frankly, because it means doing all your work twice. So yeah, it's annoying. You don't want to remove them all though. Keep them as they are and add variations as you need to. Question from James. What is the best way to implement dark mode? So if I were to do it, I would register a observer notification, something like did switch theme, I don't know, a custom one of our own choice, and then add my own UI view monitors to that, saying hey button, hey label, switch between light and dark. Obviously you want to namespace this very carefully because dark mode is likely to appear in iOS 13 apparently, so watch out for that. But in the meantime, just add your observer and then post it when they set a setting, and then all your UI updates with that. John, no constraints on my render. Does it handle orientation changes? No, it does not. It does not. You need to handle what's it? Is it funk? I forget what the function's called. It's like will transition to size. There you go. Boom, this thing here, and then use coordinator tor dot animate alongside transition like this, because that way you can animate redrawing the thing at portrait and landscape all you want to, if you want to do. How to suggest handling finishing 100 Days of Swift? Well, I've been thinking about that, and I think I'll do something special. So it'll be a surprise, but keep at it, that's for sure. Where would I set corner radius? So if I'm using um, storyboards, you could make a custom UI button subclass with like rounded corner button, which has IB designable and IB inspectable set for your thing, so you can actually modify corner radius directly inside IB. That's tempting to do actually. That'd be quite nice. Because I tend to use storyboards where possible. If you do it in code, you do it in code. Whenever you make your review, basically. So why are we rendering the text inside the image on using UI label? Only because the shadow is quite weak on UI labels. Even at full darkness, it's still pretty weak. By rendering an image, we actually render the text multiple times to darken the shadow nicely, which is better. Yami Yugi, what I do accessibility. I've done that already online, and it's really not that hard. I've done a comprehensive checklist of accessibility. It's actually more just hygiene to get it done. It does matter to a lot of people. It wouldn't necessarily make a great Sunday's event, though, I'm not sure. Question, will I arrange a conference this year? Chances are, yes, I will arrange a conference this year. If so, don't know roughly when. Probably early July. So after the WWDC. I'm thinking of arranging a UK-based conference this year where we'll have speakers coming in. There'll be stacks of hands-on tutorials so folks can actually learn how to use stuff, in person and try out with real code. Because otherwise, it's just sessions. It's another conference really. I want to make mine special by having actual tutorials happening there. It'd be great. When will Unwrap be released? When I have time. I am massively overworked. So when I have time, I'll release it. But it takes time. I'm going to get it right, obviously. Using the IB design to get Xcode slow, I agree it's problematic. It is problematic, and it isn't getting much better. Sometimes what I do is I'll go ahead and make things work and look good, and then remove the IB designable because it causes my thing to crash. Dimitri, the sound, I suspect what you're hearing is my laptop. It's literally going at 100%. The fans are on full blast because it's just a rubbish laptop, quite frankly. Sorry about that. I don't care much about that. Am I going to live stream it? I've got no idea. I haven't even got an event booked yet, or a venue booked, or even dates fixed, or speakers booked and similar. I'm going to live stream. I've got no idea. So we're going to find out in 6 months' time, because it'll be early July. What about then? Okay. If you have any more questions, this is your last chance. I will post the source code to my GitHub repository. If you want to ask questions, by the way, come on the Slack channel. You can ask them there. That'd be great. I can give you a link for that probably actually. The link for that one is there. That's the Slack link. Have I ever done a session with another partner? It's possible. I did a live stream with John previously, but we used Crowdcast rather than YouTube. I don't really know how well YouTube handles multiple people streaming things, whereas Crowdcast is very good at that. So who knows? Got budget sales. I've got no idea what iOS will do in the future. How could I possibly know that answer? I've got no idea. You are most welcome, everyone. I will see you on Twitter or in Slack. Go and follow the 100 days, by the way. The third day is now posted. You can go and follow along there and keep up, which is great. All right. Thank you very much, folks. I will see you around shortly. You know where I am on Twitter. You know where I am on Slack. By all means, come and grab me. Or if you really want to, you can email me. And, of course, subscribe to my channel. There's stacks of videos in there. I'm releasing some more today, all being well. Take care.